A period road trip comedy drama through the South? Why does this sound so familiar? Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about Amazon's 2020 comedy drama, Uncle Frank. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, ranked lists, and trailer reactions. All of my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all that extra content. Uncle Frank stars Paul Bettany, Sophia Lillis, and Peter McDissie, and was directed by Alan Ball. Set in 1973, it tells the story of Frank Bledsoe, played by Paul Bettany, as he, his niece, and his partner Wally travel to South Carolina for a family funeral. Okay, so I'll admit that the main reason I wanted to see this movie was because I have one uncle and his name is Frank. So I did just really want to hear the phrase Uncle Frank spoken in a movie. I know that sounds silly, but as is the case with every early screener that I watch, I didn't know anything else about the movie. I avoided the trailer and any synopses, so other than the positive buzz from a few friends who saw it at festivals earlier this year, the name Uncle Frank was all I was going on. And I guess I don't really know what I expected of a movie with that title, but it definitely wasn't this. If you've seen many of my reviews, you know I'm a big fan of period pieces, especially those set in the 60s or 70s. So the fact that this movie set in 1973 was a pleasant surprise for me. I enjoyed it because of the costumes, set design, and music choices, but I also think it was a very unique choice for this type of story. Although the main plot feels excessively familiar at times, the setting provides some contextual nuance to it that manages to give it a fresh feel. The temporal setting of 1973 frames the story in a very interesting way. An LGBTQ story like this, set in present time, probably would have still worked, but the inherent repression of the time period contributed to the story and character arcs in a way that couldn't quite be replicated in a modern set movie. In addition to the temporal setting, the locations also added a bit of a unique twist to the story, showcasing the stark dichotomy between New York City and small-town South Carolina. Paul Bettany plays the titular role of Uncle Frank here, and he does an excellent job. The film's tone fluctuates from comedy to drama to melodrama and back quite a bit, but I think Bettany is able to maintain this type of emotional heaviness of the character throughout, so he never feels over the top, even in his most dramatic moments. The big dramatic monologues are what people tend to remember about performances in movies like this, but I think it's the quiet, more reserved moments that are the standouts here. Between the time period and the ultra-religious conservative Southern family, Frank's story is one of repression, of hiding his true self from his family for decades and having a number of regrets as a result. And it's that internal emotional turmoil that I think Bettany captures extraordinarily well. He starts off as this very confident character in New York, but as they make their way down south, that confident exterior starts to crumble, and we see all that repression and fear and regret bubble to the surface in agonizingly emotional fashion. Bettany provides the standout performance here, but the film's rounded out by some other great performances too. Sophia Lillis is very pleasant as Frank's niece and acts as our window of sorts into the story. The film's bookended by her voiceover narration, and she's certainly introduced as the main character, but the story does shift away from her a bit as it progresses and we learn more about Uncle Frank. The other main secondary character is Peter McDissie as Frank's partner Wally, and I think he might be right up there with Bettany in terms of performance and character importance. Although the film has an overall sense of warmth to it, there's a definite melodramatic heaviness draped over it. So the character of Wally provides some much needed levity and lightness. But he's far from just being a comic relief character, and acts as the stable emotional anchor for not only Frank, but the film itself. In spite of its plot familiarity, this film manages to offer enough unique variants throughout to keep it an enjoyable and engaging drama. And then we hit the third act. It's not bad. It's not like it ruined the movie or anything, but it was a disappointingly rushed and melodramatic ending. The film has tinges of melodrama throughout and an emotional heaviness to its drama, but it just goes over the top with it in the third act. I understand that it's supposed to be the point of implosion after all the repression we witness in the story, but it just rushes through a whole sequence of very sudden events and never gives us enough time to feel anything. Similarly, we get an ending that not only feels tonally dissonant with the rest of the film, but more importantly, unearned. I mean, it's all satisfying in a crowd pleaser kind of way, but it's not nearly as cathartic as I think it intended to be. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. The biggest pro has definitely got to be the performances. Paul Bettany's the clear standout here as Uncle Frank. He's able to deliver on the comedy when it's needed, the restrained and reserved emotion when that's necessary, and then the bigger dramatic moments too. His performance is the true journey here, though I also really enjoyed McDissy and his performance as Wally. This is a character that remains pretty stable throughout the story, without any real arc for himself, but the film's utilization of him shifts throughout, beginning primarily as lighthearted comedy before transitioning into Frank's emotional rock. Sophia Lillis also does a great job as Frank's somewhat naive and perpetually nice niece, and the rest of the family, although given only very brief moments of screen time, is made up of a solid cast of character actors too. On the con side, the biggest issue is definitely the third act. It plays out in pretty much the most melodramatic, predictable way you could imagine. Now, predictability isn't necessarily a bad thing when it comes to movies, at least for me. There can be something satisfying about a story that wraps up in the way you anticipate it to. But I think that only works if the rest of the film builds itself up to an ending like that. A film has to earn its predictable ending, otherwise it just feels predictable, in a bad way. And that's what happens here. I didn't hate this ending, but it pulls out this saccharine melodrama to close things out. And even though it's sort of crowd-pleasing feel-good, it didn't put in the character-developing, conflict-building legwork to justify the ending it gives. So it has this degree of hollowness to it, because it feels like a random, generic drama ending tacked onto a marginally less generic drama film. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying any of the films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Uncle Frank 3 out of 5 paws. In spite of some questionable script choices in the third act, I found this to be a pretty enjoyable and warm movie about family and acceptance. Plus, it has some really good performances. I would recommend Uncle Frank to people who like family dramas, especially period piece family dramas. It does skirt the edge of melodrama at times, but is still fairly reasonable and relatable for the most part. Also, if you like road movies, the second act is a pretty enjoyable character-developing road comedy. As an LGBTQ story, I think it could go either way for people. There are definitely some good moments and messages, and it does feel like a story built on personal experience, but some of the story beats are overly cliche, and it doesn't follow through on some of its darker character moments, instead opting for a rushed and overly tidy ending. If you liked Uncle Frank, I would recommend Green Book. Although the base story is quite a bit different and more heavily leans into its comedy, it's another period piece involving a road trip through the South with some really good performances. If you want another brand new LGBTQ family drama this Thanksgiving, you might want to watch Happiest Season, which just came out on HULU. It's another decent movie that also portrays itself as more of a comedy than it is and has a frustrating third act. And if you want a more fantastical movie about a strained father-son relationship, you should check out Big Fish. The basis for the story is different, but it earns its ending a bit more. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Uncle Frank? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite LGBTQ period film? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insider information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button, and if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe or add it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.